My name is Ethan. I'm 26, though sometimes I feel a lot older, especially lately. I used to think I was a pretty normal guy, average height, brown hair I mostly ignore, a job in IT support that pays the bills but doesn't exactly ignite my soul. My life was fine, predictable, safe. That was until a few months ago, when everything started to unravel slowly at first, then with an accelerating dread that's made me question every single thing I thought I knew about reality. It all began, as these things often do, with something incredibly mundane. A new apartment. I'd been looking for a place of my own for a while. Something affordable, but not a complete dump. A place where I could finally feel independent after years of sharing with roommates. This one, a 2-bedroom in an old building on the outskirts of town, popped up on my radar. It was surprisingly cheap, especially for the space. The landlord, an older woman named Mrs. Gable, seemed a bit eccentric but harmless. She rambled about the building's history, how it was one of the oldest residential structures in the area, built sometime in the late 1800s. She mentioned the previous tenant had left abruptly. A bit of a flight risk, that one. She chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just excited to have my own space. The apartment itself was on the 3rd floor. High ceilings, worn but sturdy hardwood floors, and large drafty windows that overlooked a small, overgrown park. It had a certain charm, a kind of faded elegance that appealed to me. I signed the lease that same day. Moving in was a chaotic blur of cardboard boxes and cheap pizza. My buddy Mark helped me lug my few possessions up 3 flights of stairs. He kept making jokes about the creaky floorboards and the strange smell that seemed to cling to the walls, a mix of old wood, dust, and something vaguely metallic. I just laughed it off. Old buildings had their quirks. I spent the first few nights sleeping on an air mattress in the living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes. The silence was unnerving at first, after years of roommate chatter and city noise. But I welcomed it, eager for the peace. That's when the sound started. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The kind of noises you dismiss as the building settling or pipes rattling in the night. Faint scratching, a soft thud. My imagination, I told myself. Old buildings creak. Then came the dreams, vivid, disturbing. Not nightmares in the traditional sense, no monsters chasing me, no falling from great heights. Instead, they were unsettlingly mundane, yet deeply wrong. I'd dream I was still awake, lying in bed, listening, just listening. And in these dreams, the sounds were clearer, closer. A rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. A low, ragged sigh that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced for a split second that the sounds were real, only to be met by the oppressive silence of my apartment. I tried to shake them off. Stress, new environment, whatever. I even bought some earplugs. They didn't help. The dreams persisted, growing more detailed, more insistent. Sometimes I'd dream of a shadow, just a fleeting glimpse at the edge of my vision, too quick to properly register. A figure standing just outside my bedroom door, utterly still, watching. I jolt awake, my eyes snapping open to the dark, empty hallway. My imagination was clearly working overtime. The scratching sounds, however, began to bleed into my waking hours. Initially, I convinced myself it was mice in the walls. I set out traps, but they remained empty. The sounds were inconsistent, sometimes loud enough to make me jump. Sometimes so faint I questioned if I'd heard them at all. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, shifting locations. One night, I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a distinct scraping sound from the wall directly behind the couch. It sounded like something heavy being dragged, or perhaps claws trying to tear through plaster. I froze, every muscle tensed. It stopped as suddenly as it began. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Neighbor? Old pipes? But the apartment was mostly quiet. The building had thick walls, and I rarely heard anything from the units above or below me. I started to feel an unsettling prickle of awareness, a sense of being observed. It was irrational, I knew. But the feeling lingered. A cold hand on my neck, even when the air was warm. I started leaving lights on in rooms I wasn't using, a childish habit I hadn't indulged since I was a kid, afraid of the dark. It offered little comfort. My once safe, predictable life was starting to feel exposed. And I had no idea why. The subtle unease quickly morphed into something far more persistent. It wasn't just the sounds anymore. It was the atmosphere. The air in the apartment felt heavy, stagnant, even with windows open. There was a faint, cloying scent that I couldn't quite place, like something old and forgotten, mingled with something sickly sweet, almost floral, but with an underlying decay. It clung to my clothes, my hair. I'd shower, trying to wash it off, but it seemed to permeate the very fabric of the apartment, and by extension, me. I started becoming hyper-aware of every creak, every shadow. My sleep, already fractured by the dreams, became almost non-existent. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sound, the next unsettling shift in the quiet. One evening, I was in the kitchen, making a quick dinner. The apartment was still, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I was chopping vegetables when I felt a distinct drop in temperature, as if a window had suddenly opened in the room. But they were all closed. A shiver ran down my spine, involuntary and deep. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a draft. But there was nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught it. A flicker. A brief, dark shape at the edge of the hallway leading to the bedrooms. It was gone before I could properly focus on it. My hand, holding the knife, trembled. Just my eyes playing tricks, I mumbled aloud, the sound of my own voice surprisingly small in the sudden silence. I tried to focus back on my cooking, but my heart was pounding. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if something was watching me from the unseen corners of the apartment. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. This was too real, too consistent. The next morning, I found a small, dark stain on the hardwood floor in the living room, near the wall where I'd heard the scratching most distinctly. It was about the size of a quarter, an irregular shape, and dark brown, almost black. It looked like a dried liquid, but I couldn't identify it. I knelt down, touching it tentatively. It was dry, slightly sticky to the touch. It wasn't there yesterday. I ran my finger over it, then rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger. No discernible smell. It left a faint smudge on my skin. I tried to clean it with water and soap, but it wouldn't come off completely. It left a faint, darker patch on the wood, a permanent mark. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's temperature. This was something physical, something tangible. It cemented the growing dread within me. I started spending more time out of the apartment, coffee shops, the library, even just driving aimlessly, anywhere but that apartment. But the sense of being watched, the growing paranoia, followed me. I'd find myself looking over my shoulder in public, convinced someone was behind me. My friends noticed the change. Mark asked if I was okay, if work was stressing me out. I tried to shrug it off, mumbled something about adjusting to a new place. How could I tell him? How could I explain that my new apartment felt like it was alive? That it was watching me, listening to me, and slowly, subtly, trying to break me? He'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. One night, the dreams escalated. I dreamt I was standing in my own living room, but it was different. Darker, dustier. The air was thick with the same cloying scent I now associated with the apartment. I could feel a presence, immensely cold, behind me. I couldn't turn around. I was frozen, my limbs heavy, my throat tight. Then, a voice, a whisper, right next to my ear. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like a dry rustling sound, like leaves skittering across pavement, but it conveyed a distinct message. You're next. I bolted upright in bed, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The whisper still echoed in my ears. My room was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating my familiar bedroom. But then, I saw it. On the wall opposite my bed, faintly visible in the dim glow, was a single fresh scratch mark. Long, thin, and deep enough to break the paint. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a dream. This was real, and it was getting closer. After finding that scratch, I stopped trying to rationalize things. The logical part of my brain, the part that dealt with IT tickets and everyday problems, had effectively shut down. It was replaced by a primal fear, a constant hum of dread that vibrated beneath my skin. I began to sleep with the lights on, every light in the apartment blazing, casting harsh, sterile white across the old rooms. It did little to deter whatever was there. The shadows still seemed to writhe at the edges of my vision. The scent of decay intensified, and the scratching grew bolder, no longer confined to the walls. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the apartment, clutching a baseball bat I'd bought, feeling utterly pathetic. The scratching started, not in the wall this time, but beneath the floorboards, directly beneath my feet. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way up, a frantic, desperate scrabble. My breath caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing it would stop, wishing I would wake up from this nightmare. But it didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the building. It wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient and suffering. I gripped the bat tighter, my knuckles white. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by an insidious terror. The sounds went on for what felt like an eternity, then abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. I called Mrs. Gable the next day, forcing myself to sound calm, rational. I mentioned the strange noises, the cold spots, the general unsettling feeling. She chuckled, a dry, reedy sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, that old place has always had its quirks, dear," she said, her voice dismissive. "Been around for over 100 years, you know. Nothing to worry about, probably just the pipes." She clearly wasn't taking me seriously. I didn't press it. What was the point? She wouldn't understand. No one would. I was on my own. I started doing my own research. I spent hours online, searching for anything about the building's history, local folklore, anything that might shed light on what I was experiencing. Most of what I found was mundane. Old census records, property transfers. Then, tucked away in a digitized local history archive, I found a short article from a newspaper dated 1903. It was about a strange disappearance in a building matching my apartment's address. A young woman, a maid named Eleanor Vance, had vanished without a trace from the 3rd floor. The article mentioned her room was found undisturbed, save for a peculiar, dark stain on the floor and a pervasive, sickly, sweet odor. My blood ran cold. The stain, the smell. It was too specific to be a coincidence. The article concluded with the police being baffled. No leads, just a local superstition about the building being unlucky. Unlucky was an understatement. The knowledge, instead of bringing comfort or explanation, only intensified my fear. It gave a name, a potential history to the oppressive presence I felt. Eleanor Vance. Was she trapped here? Was she suffering? Or was she something else entirely? The dreams shifted again. Now, I saw her. A fleeting image, blurred, ephemeral. A young woman in old-fashioned clothes, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. She was always just out of reach, always just out of focus. And sometimes, she would be standing by my bed, her face obscured by shadows, her hands slowly reaching out towards me. I'd wake up rigid with terror, the phantom touch of her cold fingers on my arm, lingering for minutes after I opened my eyes. The apartment was no longer just a place I lived. It was a cage. I felt trapped, hunted. I barricaded my bedroom door with furniture every night, even though I knew it was futile. Whatever this was, it wasn't physical, not entirely. My appetite vanished. I lost weight. My eyes were perpetually red-rimmed from lack of sleep. I started seeing things even when I was awake and fully alert. Flickers in my peripheral vision, shadows that moved on their own, objects subtly shifted from where I'd left them. My car keys, which I always left on the small table by the door, would sometimes appear on the kitchen counter. My phone, charging by my bed, would be on the floor. Small, insidious things, designed to undermine my sanity. It was working. I felt like I was teetering on the edge, one foot firmly in reality, the other dangling precariously over an abyss I couldn't comprehend. I knew I had to leave. But something held me back, a morbid curiosity, a terrifying fascination. Or perhaps something was making sure I couldn't leave. The idea of leaving consumed me, but a strange inertia kept me bound to the apartment. It was as if an invisible thread connected me to the place, tugging me back whenever I considered truly breaking free. I'd pack a bag, keys in hand, ready to bolt, and then nothing. A sudden, overwhelming wave of fatigue would wash over me, or a cold dread would settle in my stomach, making the thought of stepping outside into the unknown more terrifying than staying in the familiar, albeit haunted confines of my apartment. It was a silent, psychological warfare, and I was losing. The physical manifestations became more pronounced. I started finding small objects, pebbles, dried leaves, even what looked like a piece of bone, in my apartment. Items that definitely weren't mine and that I hadn't brought in. They would appear in the most unexpected places, on my pillow, in my shoes, tucked into the spine of a book. It was a deliberate taunt, a chilling reminder that I was not alone, that something was actively invading my space, leaving its morbid calling cards. The temperature drops became more extreme, the air turning frigid even on warm days, localized to specific spots in rooms, lingering like a frozen breath. I'd walk into the bathroom and feel a burst of icy air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end, only for it to vanish moments later. One night, the entity decided to stop playing games. I was asleep, or rather, drifting in that fractured state between waking and dreaming, when the cold hit me. Not just a drop in temperature, but an agonizing, bone-deep chill that seeped into my very marrow. My teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. I tried to move, to pull the covers higher, but my limbs felt weighted, paralyzed. Then I heard it, right next to my ear, closer than ever before. It wasn't the dry rustle from my dream this time. It was a breath, a ragged, wet exhalation that smelled of damp earth and something acrid, metallic. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears pricking behind my eyelids, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. I could feel a pressure on my chest, a weight pressing down, making it hard to breathe. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my constricted throat. And then I felt fingers, cold, slender fingers, tracing a path from my temple, down my cheek, to my jawline. They were delicate, yet their touch felt like ice burning my skin. I could feel nails, long and sharp, lightly scratching my skin as they moved. A shudder tore through my entire body. I could feel the presence leaning over me, its breath on my face. This was it. This was Eleanor, or whatever she had become. The pressure on my chest intensified, making me gasp for air. I wanted to fight, to thrash, but I was utterly helpless. The cold touch lingered, those phantom fingers exploring my face with a terrifying intimacy. After what felt like an eternity, the pressure lifted, the cold began to recede, and the ragged breathing faded. I lay there gasping, tears streaming down my face, until the first sliver of dawn crept through the blinds. I didn't stay another night. Not really. I spent the next day in a frantic, desperate blur, grabbing essentials, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag. I didn't care about anything else. The furniture, the boxes, my TV. They could all rot there. I just needed to get out. As I rushed towards the door, my duffel slung over my shoulder. I paused, glancing back at the apartment. It looked normal, bathed in the afternoon light, deceptively benign. But I knew what lurked within its walls, what had claimed Eleanor Vance, and was now reaching for me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, and for the first time in weeks, the oppressive weight that had been holding me back lifted. I practically ran out the door, down the 3 flights of stairs, and out into the street. I didn't look back. I'm staying with Mark now. He's been incredibly supportive, though I've only given him a vague, sanitized version of why I left my apartment so abruptly. He thinks I had a nervous breakdown from stress, or maybe just hated the place. I haven't told him about the scratches, the stain, the whispers, the cold touch. How could I? He'd think I was insane. He'd be right too. But here's the thing. Even here, in Mark's comfortable, brightly lit apartment, it's not truly over. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I feel a familiar chill. I catch a faint whiff of that cloying, sweet decay. And sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I hear it. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching, just at the edge of my hearing, seemingly coming from the wall closest to my bed. I jolt awake, my eyes snapping open, scanning the dark room. There's never anything there. Not really. But the feeling, that lingering sense of being watched, of something having latched onto me, it hasn't gone away. It's like a shadow that follows me, a whisper that haunts the edges of my consciousness. I left the apartment, but did it leave me? Or did it just attach itself? I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks, a residual trauma, or if something truly followed me. All I know is that the silence, even in Mark's apartment, is never truly silent anymore. I'm always listening, always waiting. And the truth is, I'm terrified that one day I'll stop hearing the scratching, only to feel those cold fingers on my face once more.